Downtown Halifax has a lot of history. We've got a National Historic Site, we've got cemeteries, we've got churches.
And we've got unmarked graves from the former poorhouse.
Wait, what?
No time for that now. And we've got a lot of historic buildings, like these rainbow ones behind me that make you feel like you're in a Skittles commercial. These buildings have been here since the 1800s, but after a failed attempt at heritage registration, they're amongst a growing list of buildings on the heritage chopping block.
Yep, downtown Halifax is a pretty historic place. Here on Queen and Birmingham Streets, these rows of historical buildings have housed everything from a schoolhouse to saloon, and more recently, a beloved bookstore.
But they're not officially registered as heritage buildings.
Sorry, what? These aren't heritage buildings? Because they seem pretty old. I mean, elegantly aged to me.
Oh, they're old heritage buildings. They just aren't registered, so they're not protected. If they were registered, the owners would have to apply to the city if they wanted to demolish them.
And no one's applied?
Well, see, now funny story.
Registration was proposed by the HRM in 2019, but property owners expressed concerns that the limitations associated with registration would impact their potential selling price. In face of this opposition, council decided not to impose registration on property owners that didn't want it.
What does it take to get registered in this town?
Well, a building first needs to be proposed to the Heritage Committee, and then they'll evaluate it based on the evaluation criteria.
The evaluation criteria?
The evaluation criteria. Things like age, the architectural integrity, the architectural merit.
But aren't there other things that make a building heritage worthy?
For sure. Take, for example, Viola Desmond's house up in the North End. That, as it stands, would not score high on the evaluation criteria.
What?
But we can all admit it's an important part of our heritage.
The same development pressures facing Queen and Birmingham Streets have led to the demolition of other historic buildings throughout the central core. And that's because downtown has become a really appealing place to live. In fact, it's the fastest growing downtown in Canada, with a 26% population jump from 2016 to 2021. This growth has made these rainbow buildings a pot of gold for developers. Heritage planners estimate that since 2009, the downtown has lost about 50% of its historic buildings to development. And pressures are just amping up. But new development doesn't always have to mean that old buildings need to come down. In fact, in some cases, heritage designation can benefit developers.
A new thing heritage planners are trying out is allowing extra height on new developments in the exchange for the preservation of a registered heritage building. If the building isn't registered, you may be able to demolish it more easily, but you won't get that option for extra height. Here's an example behind me.
Victoria Hall is a classic example of something called Second Empire style, featuring cornices, round-headed bracketed dormers, and a mansard roof. It's a Halifax classic, but it's looking a little shabby these days. In 2021, HRM approved a 13-story residential building on Creighton Street, directly behind Vic Hall. Before this was approved, the empty lot was zoned for around 3 to 4 stories. But in exchange for restoring the building, they were allowed to build to 13 stories. That's at least 9 extra floors, which made the cost of restoration much easier to bear for the developer. While 13 stories on Creighton Street might seem like a lot to some people, this bonus zoning is a compromise that can help preserve heritage buildings.
Why don't we do that here?
Love to, but unlike Victoria Hall, there's no empty lot for us to entice developers with. The buildings are on the most lucrative land. You could maybe incorporate them into the new building, but it's difficult with wood. Still, without registration, we'll never know what's possible.
So what can we do to preserve older, delicately aged buildings?
Cue Barrington Street.
Notice all these old buildings on Barrington? Well, these aren't protected individually like buildings in other parts of town. Here, they're part of a heritage conservation district, aka an HCD.
HCDs are a really great way to preserve historic buildings. In fact, they're probably the best way. Here's why.
Firstly, an HCD is basically its own zoning area, with specific policies that prioritize preservation goals. This means there are much stricter rules about demolition. Secondly, there are additional financial incentives to encourage property owners to restore and improve their properties. Just look at all this restoration. It works! But it's unrealistic to think our entire downtown is going to be one huge HCD.
So where does that leave buildings like those on Queen and Birmingham that aren't part of a conservation district, aren't registered by individual property owners, and can't be incorporated into a new development?
Well, they might slip through the cracks. If we want buildings like these to be preserved for the public good, we need to invest in them in the same way we would invest in things like parks or libraries. Specifically, there needs to be more grant money available to ensure that they get the maintenance they need and to incentivize owners to recognize the value of a heritage property, not just the land it sits on.
While these streetscapes may not have scored a perfect 100 out of 100, I think most people would agree that they're pretty special. Halifax is just more Halifax with them. If we're going to lose them, let's at least use their legacy as a cautionary tale on how to better protect the historical buildings we still have. If they can do that, they'll be a part of our heritage even after they're gone.